I'm going to pick up, well, not exactly where I left off, but Psalm 27. Let's start at the beginning. The Lord is my light and my salvation. So why should I be afraid? The Lord is my fortress, protecting me from danger. So why should I tremble? When evil people come to devour me, when my enemies and foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though a mighty army surrounds me, my heart will not be afraid. Even if I am attacked, I will remain confident. To me, one of the things about this is that David had an unshakable, well, not exactly unshakable, but a very strong confidence in God as his protector and provider. And in a world where, I'll just say for myself and my unruly hair here, that I tend to find my security, seek out my security from a lot of things and places other than God. Talked about it before, but it's hard not to let my bank account or my status or my influence to be the source of security and confidence. Well, the difficulty with that, I'd say the problem with that is those things are, it can turn on a dime. The financial security that you enjoy and I'm not saying that a measure of financial security and independence is a wrong thing, but that can go away in a twinkling of an eye. Well, that's true of really everything where we would look for security other than God himself. I would say, one of the most amazing and even powerful ideas from Scripture is that God is constant. I may not always feel he's constant. I may not always see his constant care, but he is there constantly. And his sovereignty, big word, and a big idea that I'm not going to try to explain it, but his sovereignty is always at work. He never slumbers, he never sleeps, he never looks the other way. Well, verse 4, one thing I ask of the Lord, the one thing I seek most. Have you ever, I am one of those guys, I underthink some very important things, and I overthink some things that are maybe not so. But have you ever thought, all right, if I could only ask God for one thing, what would that one thing be? There's a story in the Old Testament, not long after Solomon had been installed as the king of Israel after the death of his father David. God came to him in a dream and asked, what would you like? Ask me for anything. And Solomon said, I don't want wealth, I don't want power, I want wisdom to be able to judge these people and lead them. The one thing, I want your wisdom, Solomon said. God's reply is, because you didn't ask for these things, but you did ask for wisdom, I'll give you these other things as well. And he did. Don't stop thinking about that story there, though, because early in Solomon's reign, he depended on and acted on God's wisdom. But over time, well, it was a combination, in my opinion, of Solomon being a political animal and seeking alliances with with other nations by marrying women from these other nations, and the fact that he was a little bit of a horn dog. His wives led him astray. He started out well. Here, his dad writes, the one thing I seek most. What's your one thing? There's an old thing, kind of I guess maybe not just a preacher's thing, but it is a preacher's thing, and a good preacher's thing. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. What's the main thing for you? My world, granted, is slowing down. I have probably, well, not even probably, I assuredly have fewer binding commitments today than I've ever had in my adult life. It's easy to get distracted by all kinds of things. I thought maybe it would get easier to not be distracted when the number of things began to reduce. Doesn't seem that way to me. What is the one thing? And how do I keep the one thing, the main thing, the main thing? Well, David, I think he's got a pretty handsome idea on this. He says, here's the thing I seek most: to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, delighting in the Lord's perfections and meditating in his temple. Okay, we've got to set that in a historical context in order to be able to do anything with what I think is the meaning and the principle here that David wrote. For the Jew in David's day, God's presence was located between the wings of the two cherubim on the top of the Ark of the Covenant, what is called the mercy seat. His physical presence was there. That piece of furniture was the most sacred piece of furniture in the world. Now, for us on this side of the cross, oh, and by the way, by the time Jesus was on the scene, actually much earlier than that, the Ark of the Covenant had been captured, and we don't even know. There is no actual record of its location and whereabouts. By the time Jesus lived in Herod's temple, there was no Ark of the Covenant. There was no mercy seat. And yet, this idea that God's presence dwelled in the temple remained. Well, David says, I want to meditate in God's temple. Well, now that's an interesting concept. There wasn't a temple yet. Remember, David's great desire was to build a temple, and God said, no, but your son will. Well, David wrote this before Solomon was on the throne, and, many years before the building of the temple. David thought of the tabernacle as the temple. It's not a big, hard thing to figure out, but don't let that idea throw you that David was talking about, a temple that hadn't yet been built. All right. But he says he wants to live in the house of the Lord all the days of his life. Okay. There are several things that make this, a literal interpretation of this, not work. It doesn't work very well. And first big reason for me is, in the tabernacle, there was no provision for living quarters. The priests who served at the tabernacle, they lived out and away, maybe not by a long distance, but they were around the tabernacle, but not in it. So, okay, I think you don't have to have this big journey through logic to come to the conclusion that David was speaking metaphorical. What would it have meant to David to live in the house of the Lord all the days of his life? Well, here's my suggestion. The concept of living in the house of the Lord, I mean, intuitively, if you think of it symbolically, what's your first thought about that? My first thought is, if I'm going to live in the house of the Lord, okay, whose rules apply in the house of the Lord? Well, the Lord's rules. It's just like, if you come to live in my house, you got to live by my rules. Okay, I don't think that's like earth-shattering. That's not. But here's the deal. David was saying, I want to live in his house, and that assumes that David would abide by the rules of the house, right? But more important than that, the concept was that David would find security and his sustenance and his most basic needs met at home, not his home, but God's home. To live, in other words, his entire life in God's presence. To be known by him and to know him. To be in his presence, to abide there with God. That's it. Anybody want that today? Now, I think you do. I think I do. To a degree. Mainly, what I want is the goodies of living in God's house. I'm a little bit like my daughter and son-in-law did a temporary foster care for an 18-year-old boy here who wanted, I'm going to say, it's going to sound like he was a horrible kid. He wasn't. But he'd been in and out of the foster system most of his life. And a horrible, tragic story. And his main thing in life was survive. And he would do anything to survive as he understood survival. But he lived here in their house, and he was glad for that, except all he wanted was benefits. He wanted no responsibility. He didn't want to have to check in with anybody. He just wanted the goodies. And the kids provided him good goodies. We're that way with God sometimes. Yeah, I want to live in God's presence fully. Well, but I still get what I want, don't I? Huh. Okay, I'm saying this and convicting myself. I want to live in God's presence. I want to never live outside of that, but I still want what I want. Well, something to ponder in my hair. I'll see you next time on So Careless Stevie Boy.